Yep. I'm
Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. It is June 30th, 2025. And this week we are going to turn our attention to July 4th. Yes, I know it's still June 30th, but the Negro from 1619 to July 4th, 1776 had been here 156 years before Jefferson penned the magnificent words of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. And from July 4th, 1776 until September 17th, 1787, there had been 87 July 4ths from July 4th, 1776 to July 4th, 1863. 87 July 4ths when essentially white Americans were celebrating the independence of the nation. But Africans primarily found themselves as chattel slavery, less than human in the eyes of the law, less than human in the eyes of those Americans during that period of time. And in a real sense, the real struggle of what constituted July 4th, 1776, took on new meaning. First 87 July 4ths, Black people were in slavery until 1863. And if you were in Texas, there were 89 July 4ths that you did not know freedom. That's Juneteenth. And the very definition of July 4th from the African American perspective has never been the same. Not one single July 4th has the definition been the same as it was on July 4th, 1776. Our struggle through that period of time, through the pre-construction phase of the United States, the construction phase of the United States, the deconstruction phase of the United States, first Reconstruction, Jim Crow, second Reconstruction, Black people, more than any other people in the history of this nation, have been responsible for what it means to be an American. Indeed, we are responsible for the very definition of what citizenship rights mean in the United States. the 13th Amendment to the Constitution in 1865, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, the citizenship rights of the 1867 14th Amendment to the Constitution, the 15th Amendment, non-discrimination in voting for Black men, the 19th Amendment at the turn of the 20th century. Women were allowed to vote. African Americans and our struggles defined citizenship rights in the United States. It's impossible to define July 4th in any other way than what Frederick Douglass simply suggested that it was in 1852 in a speech that he delivered in Rochester, New York, where he defined the hypocrisy of America. And he said in that speech that Frederick Douglass understood better than most that no nation in the history of the world had known hypocrisy greater than the United States. In this hour, with Reverend Teresa Hord Owens, the General Minister and President of the Disciples of Christ Christian Church, we're going to talk about July 4th and what it means. The great challenges not only of our past, but the challenges of a very difficult and troublesome history, and that history going forward. When we come forward, we're going to listen to part of that oration from Frederick Douglass by the late James Earl Jones and Reverend Teresa Hord Owens in the first hour, and I will have a discussion about the significance of July 4th, and it's going to take a whole week just to unpack this. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You're listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. When we come forward, it's Moving Mountain Mondays with Reverend Teresa Hord Owens.
We can at least bring you up to speed on the news of the day. You're listening to Jesse Jackson Jr. only on KBLA Talk 1580.
Yeah. At KBLA Talk 1580, we're proud to be celebrating 4 years on the air, but we know we could not have made it this far without you. We work hard every single day to curate conversations that will enlighten, encourage, and empower you. So, from all of us at KBLA Talk 1580, a big thank you for your love and support. You don't know how much you mean to me. And by the way, if your smartphone did not update automatically, be sure to download our brand new KBLA 1580 app. We think you'll love all the new features, including new ways to send us photos and video in real time. Whenever news breaks while we're on the air, it's a new dawn, a new day for KBLA Talk 1580. And we're glad you're on this journey with us.
You never tell me where you were right there. Yeah, thank you, thank you.
During this time, it's important for everyone to know your rights. The 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments in the U.S. Constitution protects every one of us, regardless of immigration status. The 4th Amendment requires a judicial warrant to search your home. The 5th protects your right to remain silent, and the 6th gives you the right to an attorney. Just remember,
No warrant, no key. 556. Hey, you don't have to speak. 556. No lawyer inside. Don't say what's carry on. Got rights. We all got rights.
Hey, Mom, I've been meaning to talk to you about some new COVID information I saw online. I read that Black folks like us with certain conditions like diabetes, heart disease, mental health conditions, or being 50 and older, like you, are at high risk.
Boy, you sound like a commercial.
I'm just saying, I know you love your ginger teas and essential oils, but remember, there are treatment options for COVID-19.
I promise if I get sick again, I'll call my doctor to ask about my options. Visit WeTalkWeRise.com to learn more. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Do you own a 2005 or newer vehicle with a manufacturer's warranty about to expire or no warranty coverage at all? With the cost of living on the rise, Endurance is now offering a low-cost vehicle coverage plan designed to save you thousands on costly vehicle repairs. Get your vehicle protected under this coverage and have all future covered auto repairs paid directly to the repair shop for you. Roadside service, towing, and rental coverage are included. For your free quote, call 800-689-5978. 800-689-5978.
But I want you to win, and I want
Hear that?
every day.
That's the sound of
just
your
wanted to show
life.
some love, man.
Perfectly
Great job.
imperfect.
Great job.
Beating in rhythm to the world you've created.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Without further ado, let's listen to the great James Earl Jones and a portion of Frederick Douglass's July 4th, 1852 speech, What to the Negro is July 4th.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In this holiday special, we begin with the words of Frederick Douglass. Born into slavery around 1818, Douglass became a key leader of the abolitionist movement. On July 5, 1852, in Rochester, New York, he gave one of his most famous speeches, The Meaning of July 4th for the Negro. He was addressing the Rochester Ladies Anti-Slavery Society. This is James Earl Jones reading the historic address during a performance of Howard Zinn's Voices of a People's History of the United States. He was introduced by Howard Zinn.
Frederick Douglass, once a slave, became a brilliant and powerful leader of the anti-slavery movement. In 1852, he was asked to speak in celebration of the 4th of July.
Fellow citizens, pardon me, and allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess their benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days of the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty, an unholy license. Your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes that would disgrace a nation of savages. There's not a nation of the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour forth a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and the crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. That was the late James Earl Jones reading from an 1852 speech that Frederick Douglass delivered in Rochester, New York. My very special guest in this hour is Reverend Teresa Hord Owens. She is the General Minister and President of the United Disciples of Christ Church. Reverend Owens, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Thank you so much, Jesse. It's always good to be with you. And boy, those words just pierced the soul, as I'm sure they did even in 1852. It's a pretty shocking how relevant those words are, more than I've ever experienced them in my entire life.
As an African-American woman, and obviously the head of a major denomination, but let me put the denomination aside for a moment. Can you share with us the feeling of hypocrisy of Black women in our nation today?
You know, since the 2024 election, as you know, 92% of Black women voted for Kamala Harris. And I know that there's a great spirit and understanding of many Black women, be they be women of faith or not, that the hypocrisy of we having done our part to vote for a candidate that we believe stood for these principles, these rights and liberties that are so proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence, the things that are enshrined in our Constitution, and the fact that Black women continue to be least well paid in terms of equity of salary. We continue to be among the poorest. We continue to be among the less paid. And yet we are the ones more politically engaged than most parts of the country. You made a wonderful point about, I think, Black people being the very definition of what citizenship and what liberty have always meant in the United States. I was in high school in American Legion speech contest where you had to write a speech about the Constitution. And I spoke about the fact that more than any other group of people, Black people have claimed those promises, even when they have not been realized, and fought to ensure that they could be realized, and use those promises in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence as the very foundation for what we were fighting on. So I have Black women who, with all of the protests, the No King Day protests, who are saying, we have done our part. The rest of the society needs to step up and do what they need to do. So I think there's a weariness. There remains to be hope, but it is difficult as we continue to be bombarded with the news of Supreme Court decisions that are really eating away at the very things that this nation was founded upon. I think Black women, in many cases, are weary and often tired of carrying the load. And even with, I've had conversations with white women, some of my friends, to say, hey, when I look at the numbers in terms of white women, you didn't stand with us on this. You voted for the other candidate. So what is sisterhood? What is solidarity? Are you with me when it comes down to even issues that affect women? The majority of white women still voted for President Trump against their own interests in so many cases. We had thought that the issue of reproductive rights might ensure that kind of solidarity, and it just didn't happen. So there are many, and I am one, that are questioning, what is solidarity? Where will you land in this nation? As you know, I was in South Africa last week, and in conversations with people outside this country, I remind them, you can never discount the impact of racism in the United States. Any conversation, any problem, any scenario, you have to really understand the insidious nature of race and the insidious nature of the dog whistle of whiteness that is being used to galvanize certain members of the population. And Black women have been on the losing end of that from the beginning.
Madam President, when I reflect upon your journey, and when I speak of your journey, I speak of your journey in the context of the spirit energy from 1619 to the present. Certainly the first 156 or so July 4ths, where there was no Declaration of Independence, we were here. But certainly from the Declaration of Independence through the first 87 July 4ths, Black women more than shouldered the burden of their responsibility, not only for our family, but for the nation itself, raising other people when they did not have time to raise their own.
Yes, yeah.
And you began your remarks by saying that Black women have shouldered more than their burden. And I'm going to go so far as to say you've shouldered more than your fair share of the burden. In fact, as the head of a mainline denomination that is very diverse, you are in a particularly interesting position in that not only our community's leadership and focus has been part of your thrust, but you have to reach beyond the traditional barriers of race, of sex, of class, of sexual orientation to pull people together who normally would not be together but for a Black woman's leadership to see beyond her own pain and to reflect upon human liberty in the truest sense of it at the level of spirit energy. Can you share with us what that means?
I think you're exactly right. It's beyond your own pain. And I think even you and I are both in that generation of the children, right, who benefited from the movement. Our parents were active and grandparents were active in the movement. And so we were the first going to certain schools. We were the first benefiting from various laws, be it affirmative action or whatever. And in my case, being the first person of color to lead this predominantly white denomination, there is still this sense that in order to be accepted, I just become a colorized version of what is, that there are still things that are normative that are white. And I must fit, we must learn to speak and talk and use the Queen's English, and maybe we like different music, but our sense of community, our sense of what that means. I think women lead differently. I think Black folks and Black culture and around the world, people of African descent in the diaspora have a different understanding of community, as do so many communities of color. But this notion of us coming together, despite our differences, is really at the very heart of the gospel of Jesus Christ as a Christian leader. And we kind of have to make real on that, and be sure that we're not giving into our current political culture, but that we are asserting a kingdom culture that Jesus really calls us to. Every religious tradition in the world calls for a love of neighbor, right? Treating others in the same way. And so when you're a multicultural environment where everybody has particular needs and concerns in their culture, the kingdom culture has to supersede it, so that even though we live in a society where these values have not been realized, we still have to prove to the world that because of Christ, we can journey forward together to make those things happen. And if people can see that commitment in the church, then perhaps they will, as Jesus said in John 17, come to know that Jesus is indeed sent by God. So I think we have a higher moral burden and a higher moral responsibility to rise above the racism and the fracture of our culture to live in a kingdom culture.
On the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show with Jesse Jackson Jr., this day we are with Teresa Hoard Owens, and we're looking at the deeper meaning of July 4th. When we come forward, more with Reverend Teresa Hoard Owens on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo are set to sign a U.S. brokered peace deal. According to Reuters, it will be signed in Washington, D.C., giving a sign of hope for the end of fighting that has killed and displaced thousands of people. The ninth escaped New Orleans inmate has been captured. According to CNN, the sheriff's office says one last inmate is still at large. Antoine Massey escaped with 9 other inmates in May. He was arrested Friday afternoon in New Orleans, CNN says. Derek Groves, the last remaining escapee, is still on the run. The University of Virginia's president is stepping down after pressure from the Trump administration over the school's DEI efforts. According to the New York Times, James E. Ryan has told the board overseeing the school that he will resign in the face of demands by the Trump administration. I'm Mike Island. Get BIN News on demand 24/7 on the free iHeartRadio app.
On the East 105. Now, first past Long Beach Boulevard, an earlier motorcycle accident has cleared from lanes. But traveling farther east on the 105, just past Paramount Boulevard, is an accident. This one is still working. This crash is in the left-hand lane. So the East 105 is stop and go from the 405 down to the 605. 210 westbound before the 118. An accident involving an electric vehicle and an SUV blocking the left-hand lane of the roadway.
Rapid radios are instant push-to-talk walkie-talkies offering national LTE coverage and no subscription ever. Business owners can now keep in touch with up to 200 staff members at one time. Go to rapidradios.com now for up to 60% off and free shipping.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richards.
With LeBron getting ready for his 23rd NBA season, his 7th with the Lakers, he's in a very unique category. Before agreeing to re-sign with the Lakers for $52.6 million, LeBron and Vince Carter were the only NBA players to play in the league 22 seasons. Carter, a Hall of Famer, retired in 2020. Now, LeBron stands alone as the player who will play the most seasons in NBA history. Beyonce made a $100,000 donation to the Texas Southern University Ocean of Soul marching band. The HBCU band is based in Houston, Beyonce's hometown. Beyonce performed with the band during halftime of an NFL game last season. She did a 15-minute performance with the band on Christmas Day in Houston when the Texans played the Baltimore Ravens. Beyonce's donation will go to scholarships, recruitment, and upgrading the band's resources and technology. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Hi, I'm Jesse Jackson Jr., inviting you to join me weekdays at 12 noon right after Tavis Smiley here on KBLA Talk 1580. As a law school graduate and a theologian with a firm grasp of our body politic given almost 2 decades in Congress, my show is the fresh new home of an authentic, uncompromised quest for transformation and salvation, both personal and collectively, as I vigorously interrogate the theological and symbolic meanings embedded in our society. I promise to leverage my knowledge of history, theology, and both international and domestic issues to imagine an inclusive vision for the future, which I hope will inspire all of us to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as a given, not just an aspiration. So join me weekdays at 12 noon right after Tavis Smiley for 2 hours of the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show only on KBLA Talk 1580.
Nearly 7 million Americans aged 65 and older are living with Alzheimer's disease or AD. But did you know that Black adults aged adults to develop AD? You may be able to reduce your risk by managing conditions like diabetes and high blood pressure, being physically active, eating healthy, and exercising your mind. To learn more about AD, the importance of early diagnosis and intervention, and a potential treatment option, visit treatalzearly.com. That's treatalzearly.com. This message is brought to you by AZI.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a whole lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 reminds you, when we fight, we win. The Youth Justice Coalition is challenging America's addiction to incarceration and discrimination. YJC works to dismantle policies leading to mass incarceration, law enforcement violence, and the school-to-prison pipeline. Their approach, transformative justice, community intervention, free LA high school, legal defense, and system monitoring. YJC promotes safety without relying on prisons. Their goal? Prevent system contact and help people exit the system through direct action, advocacy, and education. Want to get involved or need help? Call 323-235-4243. That's 323-235-4243. Join YJC in creating change. When we fight, we win. KBLA Talk 1580, your voice for justice. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. You're listening to Jesse Jackson Jr. on KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. My very special guest in the first hour, in fact, an expanded 2 hours with Reverend Teresa Hord Owens, who is our second hour contributor on Mondays, The Faith Not to Fall, with our very special guest, Reverend Teresa Hord Owens. Today, we are looking deeper at July 4th, its meaning, its consequences, its ramifications, and the depth of what it truly means for, well, for all people, but certainly and in particularly for African Americans. I must share with you, Dr. Owens, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Thanks as always. It's so good to be here.
I have looked at every single one of these July 4ths, every single one of them, and have done a little bit of scholarship on each in terms of what was different on each July 4th. And so I summarize some of them by saying, hey, the first 87 of them from July 4th to 1863, we are in chattel slavery. 1869, if you add Juneteenth, right? But then 1863, July 4th, the final battle in Gettysburg. 60,000 people dead in a field in Pennsylvania. Still unburied in the sweltering heat. November 19th, Abraham Lincoln leaves Washington, D.C. and comes to Gettysburg. And he uses the occasion to change the definition of July 4th. Now it's November, it's practically Thanksgiving, but the dead in Gettysburg are still unburied. So the stench reaches all the way to Washington, D.C. And there he says, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war. I think we're in one right now.
Yeah.
Testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived or so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war, from political fields to battlefields. We've come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that the nation might live. It's fitting and proper that we do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. Brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. We are highly resolved that these dead shall not die in vain, that the nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, a new definition of July 4th, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the face of the earth. Abraham Lincoln uses the occasion to pick our memories and shift it from what it was on July 4th, 1776, to something we were becoming that embraced African Americans, that would embrace women, that would embrace the LGBTQ, that would embrace the foreigner, that would embrace the left behind and the least of these. In other words, an alignment began taking place between Lincoln's vision of July 4th, the principles of all men are created equal, and the authentic ministry, I believe, and I believe you believe, of Jesus of Nazareth.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, those words are so powerful that we use them, right? And we quote them almost sort of conflating that language in those sacred documents. Government of the people, for the people, and by the people shall not perish from the earth. That language has made its way into certain kinds of patriotic language. And the challenge I think America has always had, and I love the way you've broken it up into these different time periods, is this identity building, right? What does this national identity mean beyond this federation of little colonies, beyond the understanding of states? The Civil War is fought over slavery, right? There's the right of states, property rights. The fact that we still have to have conversations about the fact that honoring people who were in rebellion against the nation is not a patriotic act. That people still feel they have the right to honor these people who led the rebellion against the nation is mind blowing. And I think it just reflects this ongoing struggle that we have about our national identity and who we really are and what we really mean. And property rights and us being able to do what we want to do have continued, I think, to be America's Achilles heel. It is this notion of individualism and the fight to define what we really mean and stand for. And is it all of us, or is it just the freedom for some of us to own and control power? And I don't think we've not really even gotten past the battles of the Civil War from that perspective. There are still people trying to take us back to this whole notion of states' rights and property rights being the driving force. And I think that fractures this ability to create this national identity that I think was important to Lincoln as he was coming out of the Civil War.
I think that's right. I often remind people that human history and the history of recorded law from the earliest of periods to the present is more of a history of unfreedom than a history of freedom. Every society has known some form of slavery, some form of peonage, some form of caste-based systems that separate people who are not naturally separated by God, but are separated by laws, by customs, by traditions, by job responsibilities, like in India, where some people are responsible for becoming a human waste, and therefore they become untouchables.
Yeah.
But when you think about the idea that freedom in the American context is a fairly new idea against the backdrop of human history. There have always been LGBTQ people throughout human history, people who made decisions for their lives and who were born very comfortable in their own skin, making the judgments of what constitutes their lives. But this is the first legal system in human history that says it's okay to express yourself, to be yourself, to be your authentic self. This is a relatively new experiment against the backdrop of human history, Madam President.
Yes, it is. And the youngest democracy, and yet, we talk about this, city on a hill image, America's exceptionalism and what these ideas mean. And yet the world has always been in a position where it could do what Frederick Douglass did, and that's to highlight the hypocrisy. One of the things that strikes me is, even as this is a new idea of freedom, the church has always, Christian church has always been a tool in bolstering that hypocrisy and being a facade for it. Douglass talks about the role of the church in number one, saying people don't want us to bring the church into this fight. They don't want us to have the church to have anything to do with it. Dr. King, in the famous letter from Birmingham jail, critiques the white pastors who wrote to him saying, man, maybe now's the time. Now's not the time. So in this great experiment, and in this country that claims that it's built as a nation for God, we're in danger of violating those principles, but we're also in danger of violating those principles of the gospel that we claim to be at our heart.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr., listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Our very special guest in this hour is none other than the president of the United Disciples of Christ Church, Reverend Teresa Hordowens. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. When we come forward, more on the July 4th holiday. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. My very special guest in this hour and in our expanded edition, a 2-hour special with Reverend Teresa Hord Owens, The Faith Not to Fall on Moving Mountain Mondays. Reverend Owens is the General Minister and President of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in the United States and Canada, the first person of color and the second woman to lead the denomination with a priority of welcoming all to the Lord's table as God has welcomed us. Reverend Owens, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Thank you, my friend. It is always good to be with you here on Mondays.
Madam President, let me ask you a question, because in this first hour, I'll always ask you to close on a word of hope. But when I think about the Declaration of Independence and the magnificent words Dr. King called etched on the parcel, if you will, that all men and yes, women are created equal, I find the invitation by Emma Lazarus on the Statue of Liberty, at least in my lifetime, to take on a certain currency consistent with that. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest tossed to me. When I think about the widow, when I think about those who borne the burden of war, when I think about the poor, when I think about people who are hungry, America is a part of my living faith, not just my spiritual faith. It's an experiment that's toward something for me. Help me here, Reverend Owens.
Oh, I think living faith is really kind of all we have, right? We're always moving towards something. Our lives, our ideals are always in some cases beyond our reach and somewhat intangible, but we're always reaching and stretching, toward that higher goal. And I think that's what these documents were really intended to be. And for people like ours, we are descendants of slaves who were brought from other shores, and hundreds of years of chattel slavery, hundreds of years following that of legal segregation and denigration. And what you have is hope. I mean, Douglas ends that 4th of July speech with, I end as I begin, he says, with hope. There is there's nowhere else really for us to go. And I think one of the challenges that we have as members of the African American community, that people who have, my daughter-in-law, her father is an immigrant from Argentina. She understands herself to be Latina, but the daughter of an immigrant. Her dad came to escape the dictatorship in Argentina, where what was happening then is happening in the United States. People being picked up off of streets, taken from their homes in the dead of night. Her dad has been in the streets marching against the enforcement in this country because he has lived that kind of terror and came to this country to provide better for his children. That's what everyone who wants to come to the United States is not coming to wreak some sort of criminal scam. They're coming to live. They're coming for better lives. And those of us who hold high these ideals of what America is and what America's promise has historically been, we have to keep striving for that. The promise is worth fighting for. And I really don't think that we can give up. I think it's important for us as a Black people. I think it's important for people of faith, whatever your faith is, that this country is a place where you can live into those highest ideals. And we just have to keep striving, I think, to make that a reality. And people of faith have to be willing to speak on these things. I hold the people of faith really accountable for thinking that this is none of our business. This is we shouldn't be in politics. No. It's our calling. And again, regardless of your faith tradition, there is a call to love neighbor. And you can't just live in the world and not try to make the world reflective, not of the way you worship, but reflective of what is possible. Walter Brueggemann the famous Hebrew Bible scholar, talked about just this, the fact that we have to imagine as prophetic voices, not just critique the empire, but give people an image or a vision of what the world could be. And he always talked about our challenge is to say, because Jesus has come, it's possible to live in a different world. And I take that very personally, that my job is to help people imagine. I believe in Jesus. I believe Jesus came so that the world could be better, that we could live together, that we could all share in the prosperity that we build together, that world is possible because of Jesus Christ. You may be Muslim or Jewish, and you may have some other grounding, but I believe that this world is possible. And people of faith have a unique responsibility for trying to make that happen. And we do have a responsibility in the public square, not to proselytize our particular way of worshiping, but we do have the responsibility to fight for those ideals that we all have in common.
I want to add this and get your thoughts. And I know we have some time that may overlap into the next hour, but for the architects and the Bible for the architects would not have referred to the Balfour Agreement. It would not have referred to Israel in 1948 as we know it. In fact, they could not have imagined it. Their Bibles actually said Palestine. So they saw America, as you properly suggested, as the city on a hill. They saw it as the new Israel. They saw themselves as departing a kind of an exodus journey to the United States, a wilderness experience. And I'm just wondering, from a theological perspective, in the final 3 minutes that we have, is America still the new Israel? Is it still welcoming of people? Is it recoverable, or it has a part of the hope of what we could become has it died?
Yes. And you're a seminary graduate. We understand this narrative, right, of Israel, of being conquered, of being in wilderness moments. We understand that even after the Exodus, the promised land was literally a 20 days journey away. And yet they wandered for 40 years because of disobedience, of questioning, of failure to align. And I think that is that's where America is. We're actually kind of close to the promised land, but we're kind of misguided. We are allowing forces and persons who are looking for their own elevation, who are elevating the hypocrisy that we're living in. We're letting ourselves be distracted, and we're not holding people accountable to keeping us on that path. I think it's correctable, but it will take all of us standing up and saying, this is not who we are. This is not where we will go. I have friends, ministers who are Korean, who brought to our attention that the South Koreans were in the streets for 100 days once their president declared martial law. And in 100 days, they protested and were able to impeach the man and get him out of office and return to normal. Americans of all stripes have to understand this is our job, this is our role, this is our responsibility, and we can be corrected. We can make it to the promised land, but I do believe we're in a wilderness moment.
I think that's right, and I thought it brilliant of you to say that Israel was in multiple wilderness moments.
Yeah.
And I think that that America has had several wilderness moments as well. And I think that we are finding ourselves as a nation in soul searching in a profound wilderness moment. And I think that there is hope. There is possibility. There is something that can grow out of the difficulty of this hour. There is strength for us to be found in some of our nation's broken places. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. When we come forward with Reverend Teresa Hort Owens, it will be Moving Mountain Mondays. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show, our second hour. Are you tired of the division and hypocrisy in the church? It's time to discover a new vision for a church grounded in love, unity, and prophetic imagination that welcomes everyone to the table. Reverend Teresa Hord Owens, President and General Minister of the United Disciples Christian Church, is our guest in this hour on Moving Mountain Mondays, the faith not to fall. But today she brings with her a very special minister. Reverend Yvonne Gilmore is the Vice President and Chief of Staff of the church. She's an expert on the forthcoming book by Dr. Terry Hord Owens, Staying at the Table. In a world of increasing polarization, the church is called to be a beacon of hope and unity. Staying at the Table challenges us to confront injustice, embrace diversity, and live out our radical love of Christ. How do we have these difficult conversations? How do we dream together of a more vibrant faith, a more energized faith, a better world? I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward, Reverend Owens, and welcome forward, Yvonne Gilmore. Reverend Owens? Reverend Gilmore,
Thank you
welcome
so
to the
much.
Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Thank you. Thank you, Yvonne, for coming on.
Oh, it's a joy to be here. Thank you both. So grateful.
Yvonne, let me begin by first of all thanking you for being on our program today. Reverend Owens's book is coming out sometime in the middle of July, and we are going to cover it more extensively. But share with us your thinking on why this particular work is so important and so critical at this hour.
Oh, wow. I'm so excited. And I think this book is so critical. One, you already noted where division is rampant in the world, and not just rampant in the world, right, but rampant in the church at large. But this staying at the table is not just a kind of metaphor for inclusion, though it is that, right, that it's a reminder, right, that the church is called to be witness to the visible unity, right, in God, the visible unity. But even more than that, in kind of calling us to stay at the table, to develop our muscles to do that. It's also a resistance to illusion, right? Resistance to the illusions that keep us divided, resistance to the illusions, the theological illusions that continue to fuel our division today, and call us to be that many of us can talk about, right, what we don't want, the church we don't want, the church we don't like, the world we don't like. Most of us haven't practiced the capacity to imagine the church we do want, the world we do want, the table we need to stay at.
Reverend Owens, I know that your engagement in the public sphere is an important part of your ministry. And while staying at the table puts a particular focus on the church itself, I see a broader political application and social application for not giving up on our neighbor, for staying engaged. Yesterday, I found myself in an unusual part of the south side of Chicago, in the south suburbs, that many Chicagoans probably doesn't know exists. People wearing red hats that say, "Make America Great Again." And I was having breakfast with them. And I said to myself, I'm going to have to stay at this table. Reverend Owens, work with me here.
You know, my husband Walter, and he is throwing those words back at me all the time when I'm expressing just, he said, no, but what are we trying to do? Stay at the table. And even in our own church, we have, and one of the beautiful things about the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, if I may say so, I wouldn't say we're better, we're just different. This notion that we have a broad berth for theological difference, a broad berth for simple confession that Jesus is the Christ, but simple confession that no one is barred from the table of the Lord. We don't have rules about who presides or who can receive. We don't ask any questions. This is the Lord's table. This is a covenant meal that he told us to do so that we remember him. But we have wonderful words about who we say we are and what we say we believe, and it becomes very difficult when we actually try to live into those things. And my focus as general minister and president has always been, let's be the church we say we are. And it's hard. It's a tension of sitting at the seat when you believe, yes, everyone's welcome at the table. We simply don't have the right to reject those people we disagree with, because the greater witness is made when we can at least, if we don't agree on doctrine or worship style or practice or even political philosophy, can we agree that people need to have jobs that allow them to feed their families? Can we believe that everyone has a right to affordable and decent housing? Can we agree that everyone has the right for healthcare? Can we agree on just what human beings need to flourish? If we can agree on those things, then we can stay at the table. And those are the more important things, not necessarily common belief, but common cause for the benefit of humanity.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You're listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. We are talking with Reverend Teresa Horde Owens and Reverend Yvonne Gilmore of the United Disciples Church. We are practicing in our faith the engagement that we want in the public sphere, that we are encouraging people to move beyond their differences. But for us, it starts somewhere. It starts in a laboratory, our faith. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. When we come forward, more with Reverend Teresa Horde Owens.
Give you praise. Thank you for every breath I take. Stop and praise. Pray and wait patiently. You give me everything that I need. All I gotta do every day is stop and praise. I am truly amazed by you. Clouds and blue skies, flowers and every close to you, I can handle what life brings. If I concentrate, just concentrate on you.
Jesse Jackson Jr., the Lord on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Staying at the Table. The book release date is July 12th. It will be available only through chalicepress.com until January. Then shipping from Amazon and Barnes & Noble, available pre-order on those sites, but also on chalicepress.com, the Disciple of Christ's publishing house. Our very special guest in this hour is none other than General Minister of the Church and President, Reverend Teresa Hort Owens. Reverend Owens, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Oh, thank you, my brother. It's always good to be in conversation with you.
And we're also welcoming Reverend Yvonne Gilmore forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Yvonne, Reverend Gilmore, welcome to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Thank you so much. What a joy to be here.
Reverend Owens, let me ask you a question. Share with us the source of your motivation for why you chose to undertake the task of writing this book.
You know, there have been two things, as I say, and I'm so glad to have Yvonne with me because she is really my number two, the closest person on my staff, and is with me as I'm thinking and moving through spaces and working with the church. But I kind of have a two-plank platform, and one is that I believe that Christians in general, but mainline Christians in particular, and be mindful of the fact I'm a woman of color leading a predominantly white church. It's multicultural, but it's still a predominantly white church. That we are spiritually dry and biblically illiterate. And I have always promoted the necessity of spiritual practice as a way to ground ourselves and biblical literacy, not in a dogmatic way, more than just learning Bible verses, but being familiar with the sacred text, being comfortable with raising questions and wrestling with it critically. But far too many Christians don't have those two planks to stand on. And there have been times in my ministry before I was GMP where I wrote a piece called Love. We must begin with love. If we begin with love, there's certain roads we can't go down. There was another post I did. I said, I want a church that loves radically and critically, and living into this imagination language that Walter Brueggemann gives us about the prophet's role being not just to critique, but to say, here's the vision for what can be possible and what must be possible if we really believe in what Jesus came to say. So that was the real motivation, to really provide a theological grounding for the church, and really it's worded in a way that I hope disciples will hear it, but I also hope if you're not a member of our denomination, you'll also be able to hear it. I do talk about some things that we've done in terms of changing our governance to really increase participation by our congregations. Our polity is a congregational polity. We allow all of our congregations to have voting representation at the highest decision-making body, the General Assembly, which will convene in Memphis in a couple of weeks. And we've been doing some work that Yvonne has been leading around what's the narrative that we're living into. We call it the Church Narrative Project, going region by region and asking the people to imagine or to name what are the problems, what's the problematic. Our consultant, David Anderson Hooker, says people are not the problem is the problem. But to be able to have the strength to name the problem, but then to talk about what do we want our church to be? What do we want people to feel like? What do we want people to know and understand and experience as part of us being the disciples? So those are all the things that were in my head and what I hope to share in the book.
So let me mix this up a little bit, Yvonne. Feel free to jump in at any point. When I think about this church and this particular ministry, Disciples of Christ are far more inclusive, far more diverse, far more liberative, if you will, liberation theological oriented than the traditional mainline denominations in American Christianity and maybe even in global Christianity. My question is, when I think about Dr. King referring to the segregation at the 11 o'clock hour, the church being the most segregated body in the world at 11 o'clock, I'm wondering what, from your perspective, what it means even for Black churches who tend to be far more less democratic. They're in less democratic denominations. They claim to be liberative, but in fact, their very conservative theological leanings are bordering on some kind of super conservative orthodoxy. But our existential condition is definitely one of oppression, where the church plays a significant role in fighting for our liberative narrative. Help me here understand whether or not either of you believe that mainline denominations can become more inclusive, overcome their own segregation. And I'm not just talking about the white ones, I'm talking about the Black ones too. How do we get here to this world house?
I was going to say lots of things come to mind for me if I jump in. Is that all right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's this marvelous line where Reverend Howard Owens says, when people ask me what I'm going to do about evangelism, I tell them, fight for the flourishing of your neighbor. That's how you tell people about Jesus. Fight for the flourishing of your neighbor. That's how you tell people about Jesus. And so I think that that means, right, you're reimagining the table that everybody, in fact, is invited to, and it involves a clear understanding. And what I'll note, I think, is that the book speaks to the Black liberation theology, theological tradition. I think it speaks to absolutely mainline voices and the dilemmas that we face. And even as you noted, I think disciples are perhaps more progressive, but we absolutely wrestle, I think, struggle and have the tensions, right, that you then live in those tensions that you lifted up in a very real way. But I think even there's this beautiful reminder that the limitless love of God, right, also doesn't place any limitations on neighbor. And so this kind of imperative, right, that we love neighbor as we love ourselves, right, that we often sort of frame things around and justify, right, things based on our really kind of limited framing and view of neighbor and the people that God loves, more fully. And so to me, being called to, and all of us calling ourselves to account. And I'll just note, I think even every time she says, let's be the church we say we are, that is a positive signpost, right? That is calling us to something positive. It's also calling us to account for what we're not. It's also calling us to account for all those spaces where we say we're one thing, but in fact, our lived experience and our practices, right, things don't quite align. And I think that the world sees, that misalignment, and we recognize it, right, ourselves. And so I think that for me, part of getting there is indeed a commitment to being who we say we are, but also, right, a real deep prophetic honesty about where those things don't align.
Yeah.
Reverend Owens?
Yeah, I think, it's been interesting because before I was in this role, I pastored a completely white church, led them to be an open and affirming congregation. And there were people in the Black church community in Chicago who were DMing me going, Terry, what you doing? What is that? So this very conservative theology that we have in many parts of the Black church is striking in that it has been the Black church that's been the fundamental source of grounding of the liberation movement of the Africans that are in diaspora here in the United States. And I can't release that, right? I serve a church that's 80% white. It's 10% Black, 7% Hispanic, 2-3% Asian Pacific Islander. All of those communities of color have their own stories. I have my own story. And we say that we're a church where everyone is welcome to the table. You will find that most of our congregations are still very segregated by the way in which they identify. So we don't always say, I wish the whole church could see the whole church the way I get to see the whole church in my travels. Not as many disciples and General Assembly is one time when we all come together and people are kind of forced to maybe experience a different worship style or an understanding. But there's an ongoing struggle, I think, that I find. There are still Black churches where I'm not allowed to stand in a pulpit. There are still denominations that don't observe women. There are still even congregations where I know young queer Black people in our church have not been welcomed, even within some Black disciples churches and with other denominations. And so the Black church has a particular journey that it must continue to be on, that really must be grounded and guided by God's limitless love. We simply, John Lewis, I quote him in the book where he says, no one has the right to deny the spark of humanity and divinity that is in each one of us. We just simply don't have that right. And if you take those things seriously, then you have to say, we don't get to decide. You don't come here because your skirt is too short or you wear makeup. And so you don't get to come here because the person that you love happens to be of the same sex. We need to really dig into these Bible verses that we're using to what they call the clobber passages. And my question is always, does your interpretation expand God's limitless love or does it diminish it? And so if your interpretation is one of a diminishing love of God, then I can't go with that definition of who God is, because you're limiting God. And I don't believe you have the right to limit who God loves or who God affirms. I just don't believe we have the right to do that.
I'm a student of Henry Louis Gates's documentary on the Black church, and it being the central institution that has undergirded our faith through very difficult and very dark times. I'm wondering, when one sees the diminished participation in church, the online pastorates, the televangelists, the way in which a gospel is presented to us today, does that weaken or strengthen our liberative tradition?
There's a whole, well, I'll just jump in. I think there's a whole critique that one can give of the proliferation of, we used to talk about, there's a street on every corner, everybody's a bishop, and you have 5 people, worshiping with you. Our ministers in our tradition, even during slavery times, were sometimes the only people who could read. Black church will elevate that preacher, and there are some people who, in some traditions, you don't need a seminary degree. You just, grab yourself a Bible and a microphone, and now with social media, anybody can pop on and go live on Facebook and proclaim. I think that's why we need not only an educated, but a discerning clergy. And we need to equip people spiritually and biblically so that they're able to discern whether or not what they're hearing is truth. All the tools that we have, churches are going to more online participation. Some people haven't returned. All of those things are true, but our ability to discern the truth of what God is saying has to come from our own hard spiritual work and our own biblical proof. And if we're not relevant, if all we're talking about is personal piety, and we're not talking about Jesus, as Yvonne says, my whole quote, my evangelism is, I want you to know that Jesus cares whether you eat. I want you to know that Jesus cares about your flourishing. That's my evangelism. And so if I do that work, I think that's a more relevant way to speak of the gospel than just providing you with an opportunity with good music and a chance to get your shout on. Personal piety is not going to change the world. It's a starting point, but it's not the point. The point is, how do we live in the world as Jesus taught, and how can we share that?
We're going to be coming forward in just a minute, but I just want to make something clear to our listeners, right? That when I say healthcare for all, when I fight for an education of equal high quality for all, when I fight for a clean, safe, and sustainable environment, the right to decent, safe, and affordable housing, when I fight for fair taxes, when I fight to cut our military budget without cutting our defense, when I fight for the human rights of my LGBTQ friends and neighbors, brothers and sisters, it comes from a space. I'm just not a liberal political activist who wakes up one day, does some public policy studies and says, hey, I think this is the right thing to do based on public policy. It comes from a deeper place for those of us who are participating in that dialogue. And we are grounded in what we believe to the point that we will carry our own cross, to the point that we are willing to make and lay our bodies on the line for our own sacrifice. This is not a wasted conversation about some discourse on spirituality. It's when we fight, when Dr. King decides to go to jail, when William Barber decides to go to jail on Capitol Hill, it comes from a space of faith. And in that faith, we find the courage to stand up for those who cannot speak for themselves. And so this I find to be a very, very valuable conversation. Yvonne, Reverend Gilmore, let me ask you a question. We have about 1 minute, and it is a tight 1 minute.
Yes.
That space for you, that you draw your strength.
Theology means faith-seeking understanding, right? That you already have, there is the divine, right, present in your lived experience, and you're seeking to understand that. That for me, right, there were from ancestors, right, who were enslaved, who knew they were more than the shackles that were on them, right, who could embrace that the truth, right, of the divine spirit within them, that we still, right, theology, we're still practicing a faith where we're seeking to understand, right, how to flourish fully, right, in the image of God, and that is beyond, right, what we understand. And so for me, right, it's claiming that tradition is continuous. We're still a part of it, and if we claim we know all, right, we're kidding ourselves.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr., listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. On this particular episode, we are staying at the table. When we come forward, Reverend Teresa Hord Owens and Reverend Yvonne Gilmore. I'm Jesse Jackson. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Our very special guest and regular contributor on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show is President Teresa Hoard Owens, the General Minister and President of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the United States and Canada. And also joining us today is Reverend Yvonne Gilmore. Reverend Yvonne Gilmore leads the development and implementation of the Church Narrative Project, a ministry of the Office of the General Minister and President, and serves as a member of the Governance Committee. She recently offered leadership across the Christian Church in her service as Interim Administrative Secretary of the National Convocation and Associate General Minister of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the United States and Canada. Reverends, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Thanks so much. So good to have you on here.
Reverend Owens, let me press you on this question of the engagement of the church in the era of Donald Trump, and I certainly want to hear from Yvonne Gilmore on this question as well, because this particular presidency, this particular attack on the history of human rights in the United States presents the church with its own set of unique challenges. Reverend Owens?
Yes, I think there has been a mobilization of ecumenical collaboration unlike anything we've really seen before. Leading into Lent, the Sojourners Organization, which was founded by Jim Wallace, a white evangelical who was really made anathema because he dared to suggest that the role of the church is to fight for social justice. William Barber's Repairs of the Breach, a group called the Faith Table that includes evangelical mainline, historic Black denominations. People have been praying and marching, lobbying senators and members of the House. Even today, I've been seeing text messages flying from a Black clergy listserv that I'm on, naming those people that need to be contacted and inviting us to reach out to remind people to call their senators. So there is certainly a huge groundswell of needing to be present. William Barber was in D.C. this morning doing a Moral Monday with people bearing witness to the trauma they're experiencing in terms of immigration. We had a young woman who's a pastor of one of our churches in California, bilingual church, had somebody who's not a member of the church literally abducted by people we don't know if they were ICE. They didn't have insignia. They had masks on, no labels, didn't show ID, literally grabbed the man and basically told the pastor's husband, they said, you're on private property. It was like, well, the whole country is our property. So we're seeing churches not being the safe places that they were. So I think there's still a lot more that we need to do because you've got leaders in certain echelons of religious leadership understanding that they need to show up. But if we really have the church mobilized, we need to see the same volume that we saw on June 14th. We need to see church folks in the street and speaking up and calling their lawmakers simply to say, again, this is not about what you believe or what you practice. This is about us bearing witness for the flourishing of our neighbor. But I sit at many tables, and Yvonne knows I've been doing a lot of traveling, been in DC a lot since the inauguration, just because we're coalescing, trying to get policy proposals in front, trying to critique the budget bill. Everybody's been laser focused on the budget bill. We were on the steps of the Capitol the first Monday and the second Tuesday in June 10th, with senators Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker, Raphael Warnock, Amy Klobuchar, who else was there? Chris Coons, reading scripture, and then there were several of us who were praying. So we've invited Republicans to join us at the National Council of Churches, a board meeting to tell us what's going on. The Republican senators didn't come. The Democratic senators came. So I don't know what to say about that. We're trying to be inclusive. But on so many levels, so many tables where I'm sitting at, there's a huge concern, but we still have to break through this concern that this is not the church's business. And I go back to King and Letter from Birmingham Jail, and I go back to what Frederick Douglass said about the church having to make it this their business.
I'd like to say that kicking tables over is the church's business.
Yes, yes.
Overturning tables is the church's business. Staying at the table as long as we can until we have to flip it is the business of the
There you
church.
go.
Reverend
That's right.
Gilmore?
Yeah. I was going to say, I think in addition to what Reverend Hort Owens already lifted up, right, that we're seeing our social contract, right, changed and redefined, or these attempts to keep redefining the social contracts that we have. And I think part of the business of the church is to put some deeper focus, in addition to the social contract, right, our covenantal call and our covenantal commitments, right, because of who God says we are and what our neighbors are supposed to mean for us, that in fact, right, the American project of providing, of making space for, as you were lifting up the words on the Statue of Liberty, right, your poor huddled masses, and bringing all of them, that in fact, we're committed to this, not just because it's a social project or a social contract. We're committed to this because of the very nature of who we are as Christian people, and as Christian folk. And so, whatever color, whether you're blue or red or purple, wherever you find yourself right on the spectrum, that there just are some core commitments, we don't get to say no to, right, or abandon. That in fact, if we're Christian, that like apathy and disengagement is just not a choice we get to make. Right, that somewhere the love ethic has to call you to a place beyond yourself.
And challenging empire is what we do. I mean, that is what the church does. That is in large measure Paul's ministry, but it's certainly a ministry that has its roots around the Sea of Galilee. Challenging empire is what we do.
That's right.
And I'm shocked by those who actually believe there is a separation between our faith and our politics, even as they advocate for a separation between church and state on tax and legal grounds.
Yeah.
Our faith kind of, Reverend Owens, compels us to engage the present hour.
Absolutely. And that is, and again, I've been in Walter Brueggemann's head for many years as he's dealt with this notion of prophetic imagination and what it means to practice imagination, and even what it means. He has a wonderful book called Truth Telling as Resistance. And he says truth telling is the emancipatory vocation of the church, to simply tell the truth and name it, and then work to bear witness to how God's love would change the world. It should matter to us. You know, the Old Testament scriptures that we read at Advent all say that this is what the Messiah is going to be like. Well, the Messiah came, did his work. He's coming again, but now we're held accountable for how we live according to the world that he said was now possible.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr., listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. When we come forward, some final thoughts from Reverend Gilmore and Reverend Teresa Hort Owens. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Tomorrow, the incomparable Carrie Gordy. Yes, Carrie Gordy will be our special guest on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show on Tenacious Tuesdays with Barbara Arnwine in our second hour. We'll be covering in the second hour, of course, a plethora of political issues that are before us here at KBLA and across the country. But Carrie Gordy has a new play project that he has been working on. He will be our guest tomorrow on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. In this final segment of this program on Moving Mountain Mondays, The Faith Not to Fall, our General President, General Minister of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, has been our very special guest and host, along with the Vice President of the organization, Yvonne Gilmore. Reverend Owens, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show and this our final segment.
Thank you. It's been good conversation. And thanks again to Reverend Gilmore for joining us.
Reverend Gilmore, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. What is your way?
Reverend Owens, let me ask you this in this, of course, our final segment. Times are very bleak. People are hurting out here. And I shared on one of our previous programs that the capacity of Christians to suffer with, not suffer apart from those who are experiencing suffering, seems to be something that experimentally Dr. King himself was actually engaged in. He did not want what the people were going through to be different than that which he experienced as a leader. It seems to me that we are called, yes, in this particular political context, to be engaged in public policy, but suffering also is part of the Christian experience and the Christian witness. We're staying at the table. We're bringing people to the table. But even in that witness, there still is suffering. Help walk us through overcoming suffering and how we can overcome it together.
Yeah. You know, I think there's a fine line between enduring suffering as a part of the witness and as a part of the work versus understanding suffering as a requirement, that in order to be good or holy people that we must suffer. Joanne Terrell wrote a wonderful book 20, 30 years ago called Power in the Blood, in which she makes the case that suffering is redemptive, but it's not required in order for us to reach that holiness. William Barber always talks about making sure that the voices of those people who are impacted are privileged and centered in these conversations and in these moments and movements. And I think that unless we are willing to walk alongside those who are hungry and unhoused, those who are marginalized by lack of health care, we have to be willing to hear their stories and listen. And we have to be willing to elevate those stories as loudly as our own voices, so that people hear not just us advocating for them, but giving them space to stand with us and speak their own truth about what's happening to them. So privileging those stories is also part of the important thing, not just using people as a photo op or saying, "Oh, I'm here with you in the trenches," but listening, having compassion and accompanying people and saying, "Help me understand what it is that you need, because I want to walk with you towards the resolution." I think that's the way that we engage suffering. And if in fact our hearts are tender towards our neighbor, then what we're seeing in the world is just crushing every single day. When we see the world violating the things that we hold dear, and we see people hurting and being attacked and victimized for no reason. I mean, that should be crushing all of us. If in fact we are engaged in that human compassion and wanting to walk with our neighbor.
Reverend Gilmore.
I was going to say, as you're talking about suffering, and Reverend Hort Owens is speaking about suffering and compassion. It's invoking for me Jesus and the Disinherited, and Howard Thurman, right? And this kind of call to acknowledge, right, folks with their backs against the wall, but also, right, that it isn't just sort of others, right, but Jesus himself who had his back against the wall, and to tell that truth, right, about how and where our backs are against the wall, and where we've either forfeited our inheritance, or it's been taken away from us, right, or we're not telling the truth, right, about what we've really inherited together. And I think there are multiple places where in the book, Reverend Hort Owens, right, not only right calls us to this emancipatory practice, right, of truth telling, emancipatory location of it, but even in lifting up, there's a beautiful story about flowers, right, and how they're beautiful, and then the leaves begin to get withered and dry, and how what once was beautiful can cut you. I think that our being honest, right, about the suffering and where we are suffering with, because I think part of it is sometimes we can cast these illusions and about prosperity and flourishing, where it's meant to sell something, and it's meant to champion commodification, not right, the flourishing of all. And so indeed, I think we are called to suffer with and tell the truth about where we've been, where we've overcome, right, and how in fact, if only a few of us are making it, that's not the dream of Jesus. That's not even the dream, right? But that if more of us are suffering than flourishing, right, we've got some work to do.
Reverend Owens, we have about 2 minutes. 2 minutes for a word of hope from you.
You know, as you're talking about suffering, there's a member of our LGBT community who said to me once, you know, Terry, you're talking about staying at the table, but sometimes my seat is prickly. And it's not, it's the seat that I'm offered is prickly, and it's not hard. And I say, I'm not necessarily sitting on a cushion or a bed of ease either. And I think we need to acknowledge that even as we call people to this really hard work, that there may be moments that, as you mentioned earlier, Jesse, that we either need to flip the table or we may need to step away from it. And maybe there is even another table at which we engage if we can't determine that the table at which we're sitting is valuing our humanity, that it's valuing our freedom to be who we are. There may be healthy ways in which we need to create other tables that allow people to be safe. So the idea of staying at the table is not to your own detriment or to the diminishing of your own humanity. But those of us who do have voices have to ensure that even if we disagree, we have to understand the greater witness is made when we can collaborate on those things that really do lead to human flourishing. That's the ultimate witness of the love of Jesus Christ and the gospel that we as Christians are trying to proclaim. And when people see we care about those things, I believe that's just the greatest form of evangelism the church can engage in. And we can't be afraid to do the work. We're not agree on everything. I don't need you to recite the Nicene Creed in order to work with me on hunger and housing and civil rights and healthcare. I need you just to believe that God loves all of us and that we're called to simply bear witness to that love, not common belief, but common cause for the flourishing of humanity.
Reverend Teresa Hort Owens has been our very special guest, and Reverend Yvonne Gilmore has been our very special guest on this Moving Mountain Mondays. I hope you guys will join us soon. I know, Reverend Owens, I will see you again next Monday.
Absolutely.
I look forward to it. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. We've been given a lot of wealth of information today on our program. A deep spiritual dive not only into our nation's origins, but into the origins of our faith. I'm grateful to Reverend Teresa Hort Owens and to Reverend Gilmore for their participation. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You've been listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Until tomorrow on Tenacious Tuesdays. Fantastic, Reverend.
Oh, thank